Would some of you raise your hands have heard of Billy Meier and some of the, very good, about half the group. Well, Billy Meier is one of these lucky people that they figured, well, he's kind of a simple type, we'll show him everything. Well, these are the benevolent aliens, and they've been here helping us.
But I think a similar kind of thing is, let's look at the case of the Swiss, the man in Switzerland who was contacted by extraterrestrials and made.
Но имеется еще один контактер известный, это швейцарский человек. Meier.
Который снимки делал, да, вот эти?
I saw the pictures the day after investigative team went to Switzerland.
Я видел картинки, которые были сделаны нашей группой исследователей после того, как это явление было зафиксировано.
I know the investigative team very well. And they came.
Я очень хорошо знаю людей, которые входили в эту группу исследователей.
They came to my home.
Они приходили ко мне домой.
Show me all their pictures the day.
Показали мне все эти картинки, которые они получили.
Very fine photos, yes, very fine.
Very fine. They were absolutely authentic.
Эти фотографии были абсолютно аутентичными.
And yet the whole world has tried their best to make them out to be fake.
Hey, Lee.
Hey, Tom. What's up?
Just got this back. We sent this photograph over to Neil Davies. Just got his report.
Neil Davis.
Physicist, aerospace industry subcontractor.
Right, okay, got it.
Examined the photograph with microdensitometer. Also, these you're seeing here are the black and white color separations that he did, and let's see what the results were here. Examination of these plots did not reveal any details which would cast doubt upon the authenticity of the photograph. And there's more. Color copy names, color separation. Nothing was found to indicate a hoax. And his conclusion is even more interesting. Let's see, black specks. Nothing was found in the examination of this print which could cause me to believe that the object in the photo is anything other than a large object photographed at distance from the camera.
This is the new picture that we digitized last week using the microdensitometer. We transferred it over to floppy disk here. Let's look at the first map in low-pass filtering.
Why these particular colors on the screen? What are we seeing?
I mapped it in such a way that the real colors are not what we're seeing, but one shade of a color that's really similar to another one, like two shades of red, are in high contrast so that we can really see the difference.
I see. Have you found any anomalies yet, of any kind? Anything
I find strange things, but nothing that would tell me that someone's tampered with the pictures.
I see. Nothing indicating a hoax method or indicating superimposition or anything like that?
Nothing that I can find.
Have you been working on the grain at all yet?
Yeah, I have. What we're seeing here is that the film grain holds up the way that it should. In the pixel distortion test, it appears to me and to the computer that this object was photographed in the same original piece of film at the same time that the background was photographed. In other words, no overlay. I would say these pictures are genuine.
This is one of the...
Because of the unusual nature of the findings, the fragments are given to chemist Marcel Vogel, an expert in crystalline structures and inventor of many substances used in computer components.
The first specimen I looked at is a metal specimen, which I classified as F1. This is the appearance that it looked at, rather golden colored on one side, silvery colored here. We find that in truth it is silver and a small amount of copper. we look at it here, this same area here, under polarized light, what is unusual of this small specimen is both highly crystalline nature, and suddenly we come to a metal section as we see here, and it showed a combination of metals that I've not encountered in any normal bit of metallurgy, both crystalline deposits and metal. Now, we, with any technology that I know of, could not achieve this on this Earth plane. I could not explain the type of material that I have and its discreteness by any known combination of materials. I could not put it together myself as a scientist. It's also a challenge because I showed it to one of my friends who was a metallurgist, and he shook his head. He said, I don't see how it can be put together. And we find that in this area there is evidence of machining, that there are striations which look like the sample has been worked mechanically. It doesn't look like anything that we've made here. At this moment, I would feel very much inclined to accept what was given to me as being true.
Do you ride your moped?
Yes.
Do you receive your mail at Schneider?
Yes.
Did you fake the photographs taken at Ober-Sadeleg with a model suspended... No. Wait till the answer, or wait till the question is finished. Suspended by a string?
No.
Let's do that one more time, okay? Wait till I finish. Do you live in Switzerland?
Yes.
The tape is taken back to be analyzed by Bob Felon, the former criminal investigator with the Sheriff's Department of Colorado and a specialist in lie detection.
It was also a yes answer. Number 3, do you live in Switzerland? Yes, he lives in Switzerland. There's enough stress here to indicate that probably isn't where he prefers to live, or he's lived someplace else. Question 4 was the first relevant question you asked him, is have you taken the photographs of spacecraft? His answer was yes. He's being extremely forceful, though not deceptive. And my opinion on that particular question is that he's being as truthful as possible. Number 7 was the second relevant question you asked him, and he answered right on top of the question. And the person asking the question had asked him to answer the question again, and then he asked the question again. The stress levels between the two diminished the second time that the question was asked, which is not indicative of deception, because stress builds in a deceptive pattern. It doesn't diminish. If it was a deceptive answer, the stress would then increase, not decrease.
This is probably one of the most interesting things about the tape, is that there are...
What's this right now?
Very, very many tones.
Yeah.
And they're all changing very fast.
For a moment there, we were looking in and we had 3 evenly spaced frequencies. See it there again?
Yeah, you got them again.
Yeah.
Nils, would it be possible to recreate this sound?
To be honest with you, I personally don't think so. There are not synthesizers on the market that have oscillators that change that randomly. Even if you got 9 or 10 of them going, they wouldn't change from those peaks that quickly.
So a significant thing is this rate of change.
Well, and besides, if you were going to create a noise for a spaceship, you'd be hard put to come up with something as original as this.
The tapes hold still another surprise.
And also, another interesting point to note here is we have a steady, there seems to be a steady pattern all throughout all of this random signal. It seems to be level change very steadily in around 5 to 10 cycles per second, which happens to be in the area of the natural magnetic resonance of Earth, also called the Schumann resonance.
Is that significant in any way?
It could be. It's just interesting to note the correlation there.
The peculiar correlation is something strange.
I mean, why would the correlation be there?
Yeah.
You can see it on the oscilloscope.
There remain only a few questions to clear up, but one of them has perhaps the most bearing on the Meier case. If his story is true, how did those beings accomplish a journey of such staggering distances? The investigators put the question to Alan Holt, an astrophysicist who works with the US space program, and David Froning, a specialist in spacecraft design for that program.
Gentlemen, is faster than light travel possible today in our technology, or is this still just theory?
There have been physicists that have been so bold and brave as to actually postulate the existence of particles that travel faster than the speed of light. And they have called these entities tachyons. And they have shown that the existence of such faster than light entities may not violate known laws of physics.
I've worked on a kind of a field theory approach, which is basically an extension. I like to view it as an extension of Einstein's last work on a unified field theory. I really think that everything is pointing to a breakthrough that will make possible faster than light travel. Now, not all physicists will agree with that.
How would it work?
Well, I've represented here hyperspace currents by these blue and red lines. Down in here would be space and time. So space and time is what we're aware of and what we deal with in everyday life. But there could exist a higher dimensional space, a hyperspace, that we can interact with by certain configurations of electromagnetic energy patterns. So the concept here would be you start out with a certain pattern. Generally, you're tied in with the Earth's gravitational field and its hyperspace currents, but there's a low connection with perhaps a distant star. As you change the pattern, the connection with the Earth's gravitational field and its hyperspace currents decreases, and the connection with the distant star's pattern increases. And so, in effect, you're being pushed away from the Earth's gravitational field and pulled in to a gravitational field of a distant star. I had some artists do some work here showing a spacecraft leaving our solar system and going out of space and time. This red line represents the division between space and time and hyperspace. And the spacecraft, based on the propulsion concept I proposed, would use a field resonance effect to effectively jump into hyperspace, disappearing from space and time in our solar system, and then reappearing at a distant star.
Mr. Froning, you showed me a diagram that you had worked up that's very similar to this, that describes a hyperspace leap in some fashion also. It's remarkable how similar they are.
What I've tried to symbolize by this diagram is, first of all, the familiar space-time plane of existence shown here in blue of our physical world.
At the journey's start, some distance is traveled and some time taken getting out of the solar system is shown by the curved line at the left. Then a hyperspace jump covers most of the distance with almost no lapse of time. Some time is taken again decelerating to the target, the curved line on the right.
So this line here is very similar to the red line Alan has on his chart.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. This line he shows here is the jump I show here.
Yeah. What shape would such ships have to be to make such a trip?
I initially came up with this design, with a central circular symmetrical shape. This top figure shows the field resonance system in its space-time jump mode, where it initially rises up to a certain point, and as it rises up, as the pattern gets closer to the resonance point, the colors can change, showing the higher energy flow. And you do get an effect in this concept that is very similar to what is observed in some UFO sightings.
Okay. Dave, concerning the Pleiades, they're about 500 light years away from our planet. What would you estimate the time in this form of travel?
We're talking about on the order of 8-hour transit times between the Earth and in a system such as the Pleiades star cluster?
Well, at first it was just to try to check the veracity of the case itself, to find out what the evidence was behind it that supported it, and I did that for several years. And then I learned about the Talmud of Emmanuel document that was associated with the case, and then I spent most of the rest of my time since then looking into the genuineness of this ancient document that was discovered in 1963.
What conclusions you came?
Well, after many years' research, I've just found hundreds of reasons, hundreds of them, that indicate the Talmud of Emmanuel was the source of the Gospel of Matthew, in the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, and that it was no hoax based upon the Gospel of Matthew. There's just too many things it explains, too many uncertainties that the scholars, New Testament scholars, have had over the centuries and years that are explained by this document that in a totally creative way that the scholars themselves would never be able to accept, because there's so many problems they would have with the Talmud of Emmanuel. But yet for someone with an open mind who is outside of the establishment, they can see the reality of it, I would hope. The scholars have many reasons why they can't look into this document. Like, for one, it's heretical in quite a few different ways, not just one or two ways. And, well, I came to the conclusion that the case could be no hoax, based mainly upon the first-hand investigations of the primary investigators that were investigating the case when it was only 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. This was mainly Wendelle Stevens and his associates, plus Gary Kinder, who did thorough investigations in 1983. The other investigation started in about 1977, and his case became noted to the public in 1975. And so I looked into it as much depth as I could, even went to Switzerland in 1985 to check out a few of the secondary witnesses that I could. It all checked out, plus the reasons why certain debunkers are totally against the case. It all made sense that it was very real. And then it was back in 1984 that I learned about a document that came out of this case called the Talmud of Emmanuel that purports to be the true teachings of Jesus, except his name was Emmanuel then, until Paul got it converted to Jesus through Paul's own desires to call him Yeshua. And so learning about this document then started to occupy my time, and I turned myself into a New Testament scholar as best I could to look into the genuineness of it and find out that the Gospel of Matthew is closely related to the Talmud of Emmanuel. And one follows along the other closely enough so that you know that either the Talmud of Emmanuel was the source of the Gospel of Matthew, or that it's a 20th century hoax based upon the Gospel of Matthew. So I've been spending my 14 or so years since 1983 examining those two possibilities, and I can only conclude that there are several hundred reasons that indicate the Talmud of Emmanuel was genuine, the source of the Gospel of Matthew, and it was no hoax.
What is the most convincing reason?
Well, it's mostly the accumulation of evidence. Each of these 300 reasons or 320 reasons by itself may not be totally convincing, but you put them all together and they're overwhelmingly convincing. These range from very minor things that scholars have picked on with the Gospel of Matthew, that you read through the Talmud of Emmanuel and you find that the mistake isn't there. The Talmud of Emmanuel reads something somewhat different there that was heretical. The compiler, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, had to alter it to make it compatible with his own beliefs and the beliefs of the early Christian church. And so in so doing, he made some little mistake here and there that some scholars have picked up, and written about in the literature. And then you can find that the Talmud Manual just doesn't suffer from that error. And this happens over and over again with a lot of minor things. But then there's the major things that explains how Jesus, whom I call Emmanuel, how he could have had appearances after the crucifixion. Well, the biggest heresy, I guess, within the Talmud of Emmanuel was that he survived the crucifixion. Of course, this is in accordance with a lot of legends that say he traveled around Anatolia or the Turkish area and eventually farther east and on to the India, Kashmir region, where he lived a long life and finally did die and was buried in a tomb in Srinagar, Kashmir in the early 2nd century. So we have these major things that the Talmud of Emmanuel explains too, how those legends got going, how the disciples insisted that they had seen the risen Jesus, the risen Emmanuel, in the days following the crucifixion, several different appearances, and why these appearances in the different Gospels are all slightly contradictory to each other. This was a very sensitive item. Each one had to be edited by its Gospel author to be sanctionable, and through that editing they all differed from each other in one way or another. So the scholars have tended to discount the post-crucifixion appearances of Jesus totally. Most of the modern scholars do for that reason, although in so doing they're just saying that, well, where there's a lot of smoke, we don't think there was any fire, which is not a very good reasoning to use very often. That's just one example of one major thing. There's too many others. One major heresy, well, one series of heresies is that the teachings of Emmanuel, I would say, were altered and distorted because they were unacceptable about 85% of the time. And this is because he taught about spirituality, taught about the existence of the human spirit, its evolution over lifetime after lifetime, which meant he taught about reincarnation. He taught about eventually perfecting yourself in spirit, zillions of lifetimes into the future, becoming almost one with a true God, which he calls creation in the Talmud of Emmanuel. All that had to be edited out, leaving the writer of the Gospel of Matthew to substitute all kinds of stuff in its place, in particular talking about the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, wherever the Talmud of Emmanuel would talk about the realm of the spirit, the realm of the human spirit. That alteration was pretty successful for him. There weren't too many complaints about that, but now and then it would lead him into trouble. Something didn't fit the text right, and he would go on with the text and then find that there's a contradiction, and the contradiction would be picked up. One of the contradictions that comes to my mind is early in Matthew, Jesus is quoted as saying that you shouldn't swear. You just should say yes, yes, or no, no. Just don't swear by anything. Then about 18 verses later in the Gospel of Matthew, he says, if you're going to swear, don't swear by the gold in the temple, but it's the temple that makes the gold sacred. And if you're going to swear by God, it's because God is the God of everything. In other words, he contradicts this earlier spot, and you can compare this with the Talmud of Emmanuel and find that the Talmud of Emmanuel was consistent throughout. This is what there's hundreds of examples of in the Talmud of Emmanuel, indicating that Emmanuel was a logical teacher. He had to teach spirituality in as logical a way as he could. And this probably wasn't too easy to do.
I was sitting outside the window of my room, looking outside, seeing people passing back and forth in the Ashoka Ashram compound. And as And then I turned towards my right on the path directly in front of the Ashoka ashram. I saw two people walking slowly on the path towards the youth hostel. That's where Billy was staying. And the two person was Billy Meier, and on his side was this woman that later on I came to know that it was Asket from the Dahl universe.
This is the path where Billy walked from the main gate to here, and this is where I saw Billy Meier and Asket from the Dahl universe came and walked here, and both of them slowly walked on this path towards the Ashoka Youth Hostel where he was living at that time.
Yes, he was walking around in the Ashoka mission. So I saw them walking. I think one time I saw them in front of the youth hostel and they were looking behind something. Do you remember in some occasion you saw something and both of you looked the right? I don't remember because I saw it from afar. I don't know what occasion, but that was why I took a close, or at least staring at her, because I kind of knew her.
In front of this youth hostel, Billy Meier and Asket used to stand here and talk, and in this corner here I used to see them, both of them standing and talking. And I was in that corner near the Bodhi tree over there, and standing behind that tree where the pond used to be underneath that, and looking thiswards, I saw both of them standing and talking, and at one point both of them together turned towards the main road.
When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I had an experience, or a couple of experiences that were very interesting to me. I would have a very beautiful lady visiting me in my bedroom when my brother and I go to sleep. She would come and impart certain knowledge, certain learnings to me through a non-verbal communication. I could, describe it as something that was directly transferred to me without words. And this went on for a few nights, and I just took it as something very natural. Being a child, to my child's mind, it was very something that was natural and was wonderful. When I had my experience, it was not something, for me it was very natural. I have seen a lot of ships over the temple, or over the, we have a large area over the trees, near the well, on the doghouse. All these areas that I have seen the ships, sometimes it was very low. I could see a huge, it's almost like, one time I saw maybe half of this room size of the ship. And sometimes I see very small, further away. It was nothing strange. It was not something that caused me to run with excitement to ask some adults or my grandfather or my ayah or my governess what I see. It was a very natural phenomena for me. So when I had experiences with Asket, it was also not something very unusual or strange for me. It was almost, it's the most natural, but it's almost like a return to some known, familiar state.
This is the main temple here, without the front covering of the ashram. We used to look up. Sometimes in the evening you can see the ship station right on top of your head. Sometimes the ship would be seen on this direction. there were lots of more trees from here to that area, but we could see it from usually at night or early in the evening when it was hardly any sunlight left. I have seen for a few times UFO over the Ashoka Ashram. One time I saw just some kind of a disc-looking, blitzing out in and out of the sky. It was early evening, so it was not quite dark yet, and the disc looked it's almost like a round, but it looks kind of dark against the sky. So and it was moving fast in and out of the clouds, and changing position many times, and after a while it went away. This is one of the phenomena where hundreds of people saw this. This one, I think, had been witnessed by a whole, I think maybe 100 people. Even was written in the Indian newspaper in the 60s. Actually, one reporter was dispatched from the newspaper, I think the New Statesman or something. If we dig, we could find the article. He came, talked to the villagers, talked to people who work at our place, and was shown, and even talked to Billy and was shown the photos. And he wrote an article about this and interviewed a lot of eyewitnesses. I saw quite a few like this. You know, in the summer when it gets hot, we sleep with the, remember charpai?
Yeah.
The bed, the string bed.
Yes.
Outside, and looking up always. Sometimes I see. In the summer. Oh, this one.
That's the same time as this one here. It's maybe a half a minute different.
I see. As far as I could recall now, she looks very much like, of course, like one of us, but to me, she was not very big or very tall. Slim and long, dark hair, like dark brown hair, and kind of beautiful and delicate somehow.
You usually find that people that are not telling the truth are evasive. They look away to get their answers and things like that. Mr. Meier looked me square in the eye and answered every question, looked right into my soul when he answered the question. He gave me simple answers and very direct answers. He gave them to me in English, and I was convinced that he was telling me what he believed to be the truth. Well, I became more convinced that the photographs were real when he took me over all of the photographic sites, and I could see that there's no place to suspend lines into the scene. The hill dropped away at a steep angle. There were no anchor points. There was no way that he could have thrown it into the scene, because I saw scenery on the side of each image area that was greater than you could throw up a small model into. Also, it wasn't pushed up from the bottom, and I became convinced that there was no way I could figure out that anybody could get models into the scene. We found that the metal, which we tested in several metallurgical laboratories, not just one, we found that the metal was unique, that it had unique properties, that most metallurgists agreed that it could not have been made on this planet. The sounds were unique. We went to the biggest sound bank in the world, the Groton Naval Sound Research Laboratory, Groton, Connecticut, run by the Navy. It has all the sounds in the bank that you can get, and they're computer controlled. When we put the UFO sounds into the bank, it couldn't find a match. The piece that we put in there was the sound recorded when the Mirage jet was making passes on the alien beam ship. And the computer matched the sound of the jet engine, gave us the model of the jet and the engine it was using. It gave us a police siren, a European police siren that was used in certain countries. it gave us a Junkers Ju-52 flying in the area, which we didn't hear on the tape. I didn't hear it. Meier didn't hear it, but it was there. They gave us a report. It reported that a Swiss Pilatus Porter reconnaissance plane was in the vicinity, and also recorded the sounds of the jet engine. Gave us all of this information, including that of a barking dog, which we could hear the barking dog, but a lot of sound information that was imperceptible to us was all discovered by the sound bank. So that was quite unique. And then when we took it to sound technicians to find out what kind of sound it was, they had some problems. They couldn't find out how many emitters were involved. One idea was there was 8, another concept was that there were 24 simultaneous emitters to produce the sound. The sound had random wavelength and random what's the other, amplitude of the waves, both at the same time. And this was something that would be relatively impossible to do. They concluded that it would take 24 separate synthesizers working together to reproduce the sound. Now those synthesizers are very expensive equipment, and no laboratory had more than one. The biggest laboratory in the world at Groton only had 2. At 10 o'clock at night, and he said, I must go out and have a cigarette. And so we went outside to sit down in the fresh air, and there was a car seat beside the door. And we sat down on the car seat. And just as we sat down with Mr. Meier right by my left shoulder, he was suddenly pulled across my lap like that. He went, ugh! And he started to get up again like that. I said, what's the matter? Are you having a heart attack? At about the time that he was pulled across my lap, we felt debris in our hair. And I thought that it was a rat in the rafters of the barn there. And at that time we heard the shot. We've already been sprinkled with sand. And then we heard the shot. He said, that was a shot. And he turned around and looked, and there's a fresh hole in the wall. He put his finger in it. He says, it's hot. And he says, let's find the bullet. And he got up and pulled the car seat out to find the bullet behind the car seat. I'm thinking, why are we doing this? The gunman's still out there. Why don't we crawl inside and get something to protect ourselves? And so we went in, and we got a big flashlight and a rifle and came out. And when we went to the point the noise came from, we found where the ground had been packed down. Somebody had been standing out there shifting his feet like this for some time, and after the shot there were running steps leaving the scene.